So, hi Jill, and welcome here on my little YouTube series called Ask the Experts. You are the second expert that I have on this channel, and this is I'm really looking forward to this interview, and especially the topic that we're going to talk about today, imposter syndrome, because I feel like it's something that everybody know, everybody heard of the term, but very few people can actually like define what it is and talk more about it, especially how to kind of like overcome it. And you're kind of one of the experts in this field, so on this topic. So I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, me too. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Just for those who might not know you, I'm just going to do a very brief introduction.
Sure.
You are the author of three books. One of them is actually, I think, is probably the third or the fourth ACT book that I bought, the big book of ACT metaphors. Then you also have a book called Be Mighty. And then like the third book is like Imposter No More, which is what we're going to talk about today. You also have a very popular podcast called Psychologist Off the Clock, which I think is like top five most popular psychologist podcast out there. Is that correct?
It depends where you look, but yes, FeedSpot said it's the number one clinical psychology podcast. It's up there. Yeah, in psychology. It's in the top 0.5% globally. It,
Okay, so
yeah,
it's very popular. Yeah.
yeah.
And then when I kind of like did the prepared for this interview today, I looked on your website and I downloaded your bio, and there's especially like one sentence that I really loved. So I'm going to read that out loud just to make sure that we
Sure.
get it correct. Um, you also had like a TED talk, and here is the sentence that I really like. She is a standing ovation commanding speaker. Okay, that's only happened once so far, but it's a goal for every talk. I really love that. I really love that
You know
sentence.
what? I cannot take credit for that. So I had a guest on my podcast named Allison Fergale, who wrote a book called Likeable Badass. And one of my clients listened to that episode, and then she reached out to me suggesting that this was something I should add to my bio based on the advice from Allison Fergale. So I did that. I thought it was such a great idea.
Yeah, it's a wonderful idea.
Yeah.
I like the book as well, Likeable Badass.
hmm
That's
Allison Fergale. It's a great book. Yeah.
it sounds like a good book.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, have you done more talks and have you had more than one time where you experienced like standing ovations?
Well, that talk was within the last year and a half. And so I've done a few since then, but the great majority of talks I do are virtual. So they're not really, people, no, people do not stand up at their desk and give me a standing ovation on Zoom. But that was, I think I've only done one in-person talk since then. So yeah,
So hopefully more to come.
hopefully more to come.
Yeah. But Jill, let's tell us a little bit about the beginning of your journey into to ACT. When was the first time you were introduced to ACT, and what was it about this particular kind of therapy that kind of like sparked your interest?
Yeah. It was when I was in graduate school. I went to Boston University and studied. I was working at the Center for Anxiety and Related Disorders under David Barlow, and my dissertation mentor was Stefan Hoffman. And while I was in graduate school, Liz Romer and Sue Orsillo were doing a research study on acceptance-based treatment for generalized anxiety disorder. And so for part of that research that they were doing, they were recruiting subjects at CARD, our anxiety clinic at BU. And they needed student therapists to use the treatment manual in the research study. And I remember there was an upperclassman who said, Jill, don't do it. You are going to be so busy. Do not take on anything extra. And I am so glad that I did not heed that advice. I signed right up to be a therapist on that study. And so in graduate school, it was a very CBT oriented program. Of course, it's an anxiety disorders program, so lots of exposure therapy. So I was doing that while simultaneously learning ACT from Liz and Sue, and Steve Hayes came to BU once or twice to do some supervision with us. And I mean, I was hooked. So in the very beginning, I was doing lots and lots of CBT and a little ACT. And over the course of my career, that has really shifted to the point where all I do is ACT. And especially because exposure therapy is a part of ACT. So it's not, either or, it's like you're still doing it because I have an anxiety clinic, I should say that. So I predominantly treat anxiety disorder. So of course we do exposure, but without the cognitive restructuring and with, of course, a heavy values component to it. And I think where that shift came from is I was practicing cultivating psychological flexibility in my own life and just personally seeing how absolutely life-changing it was. And so I started doing more and more of it with my clients. And I mean, that was it. I drank the Kool-Aid. I was hooked.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that also because that's sometimes I feel like many people forget or when they're new to ACT, they think like we do a lot of like acceptance, but we actually also work a lot with exposure. But
Absolutely.
interesting to see someone who started off like being trained in more like classical CBT, then kind of like shifted into to ACT instead.
Yeah.
And then your interest in the imposter syndrome.
Mm.
Where does that come from, or what's kind of like what's the story behind that one?
Yeah, I think that first happened. It was sort of two things happened at the same time. One, I was in my master's program, and my mentor at that time kind of pulled me aside. I had gotten into BU, and he pulled me aside and said, "Listen, I just want you to know that you're going to go to this program and you are going to think everyone knows more than you and you have no idea you got in and that you don't belong there." And I'm sitting there with my eyes wide going, "Oh my God, how did he know? Like, how did he get inside my brain? I already feel that way. I haven't even gone to Boston yet and I feel that way." And for him to say, "That's normal. It happens to everybody. Like, don't let it get in your way." So that was part of it. But before that, I had another mentor who, when I told her all the things I was interested in, she recommended I apply to BU for my PhD program. And I was living in San Diego at the time, but Boston was home for me. And I didn't want to go back home. And so I wasn't even thinking of applying there. But because, I really trusted this mentor and she knew me and she said, if this is what you want to do, this is where you have to be. And, then I looked up all the stats, and this was so long ago, it was in a paper book, like, pre-internet, you couldn't just research your programs. And I
Pre-AI
saw
as
how
well.
pre-AI, oh, way pre-AI, yeah. And, basically I saw how incredibly competitive it was and was like, there's absolutely no way someone like me is getting into that program. So whatever, I'll apply. No harm, no foul. And I decided not to tell my parents because I just didn't want any pressure to come back home and was like, well, I'm not getting in anyway. So what's the point? And then the secret kind of ate away at me. And eventually I confessed to my dad that I applied to this program to work with David Barlow. And my dad, who's a businessman, who knows literally not one single thing about mental health, says, "Dave Barlow, the psychologist?" And I was like, yeah. And he said, "Oh, I played golf with that guy." And it turned out that they belonged to the same golf club. And the next time he bumped into Dave, he said, "Oh, my kid is, applying to your program." And then fast forward a few months and miraculously I got in. And my mind told me the only reason I possibly could have gotten into that program, someone mediocre like me getting into this really stellar competitive program, is clearly because my dad knew the program director. Now, like logically, that's not very like trusting of Dave Barlow, right? Like I'm sort of questioning his integrity that he's just going to like let his buddy's kid into his program when he's only accepting, I think there were 12 of us in my class out of 800 or 900 applicants, and he's just going to give some idiot a space because his golf buddy wanted him to. So like logically I understood that was unlikely, but emotionally I could not shake it. And even today, I swear to you, 25 years later, when I tell this story, I wrote about it in my book, Imposter No More. And in fact, I think that might have been the first time I kind of confessed this out loud in the book. And now I tell the story, and every time I have this zhuzh of anxiety thinking whoever is reading this or listening to the podcast that I'm now sharing, they're all like, well, yeah, obviously that's what happened. Like my brain is still so convinced that I didn't deserve it, that I didn't earn it. And the whole time I was there, I was just waiting for everybody to find out, that I was just going to be revealed as a fraud who didn't really deserve to be there. So those two things got me interested in the construct itself. But what made me like write the book and really delve into it more was less about the fact that this existed for so many people and more like I thought for sure once I got to grad school and started to prove myself, if I just get some, I don't know, awards or publications or do really impressive things, then eventually I'll outrun it, right? Like eventually my portfolio will speak for itself and then I'll feel legitimate. And that still hasn't happened. And you have my bio. Like, I mean, I can say there's some cool objective things I've done that lots of other people haven't done. And I still, like, it just has not diminished in any way, shape, or form. And so that was the thing that really interested me the most is, the research on imposter syndrome. If you Google it, you get hundreds of millions of hits. But if you look in PubMed, like a scientific database, there's only hundreds of hits. So there's a real lack of solid evidence or research. But what little research is there seems to be a positive correlation between success and these experiences, that the more successful you get, the more likely you are to struggle with imposter thoughts and feelings. And like that aspect of it really, really fascinated me.
That sounds very interesting, and that's something that we are really gonna come back to.
Sure.
And I think what you're talking about here is something that many therapists can relate to, many psychologists can relate to. I remember when I started at the university, like one of the first talks that we had, an introduction, they told us, if there's something you don't understand, feel free to ask, because we promise you, you're not alone. Around like 80% in this auditorium has the same question as you do. And
Right.
yet no one really asked. Like that feeling of, yeah, I'm the only one who's that stupid, or the only one
Yeah.
who doesn't understand it.
Right. Right. And if I raise my hand and ask and no, everyone thinks that's a dumb question, then I'm revealing that I'm a fraud. And so I need to just sit here quietly. I went to one of the moments that I had this, wow, it's not just me, is I went to a writing retreat and there were probably, I don't know, 200 people there. And the woman, Dani Shapiro, who's a memoirist, wrote a great book called Inheritance, several great books. But anyway, she asked the people in the audience, how many of you are writers? And like maybe three people raised their hand at a writing retreat. And then she said, how many of you write? And every single person raised their hand. And I thought, what is that? Right? Like that is people saying, I'm not a real writer, right? Like I'm not legitimate. Like, yeah, I like to do this cute little creative hobby, but I'm not really a writer, right? That's imposter syndrome. And, it really struck me in that moment. You could see everyone sort of looking around and having this like communal sense of like, oh my gosh, you too? And people ask me all the time, like, what can leaders do to help their staff if they're struggling with this? Those kinds of questions. And I think the best thing all of us can do is have conversations like this, right? Is to like admit that most of us, and the research said, well, I've seen a wide variety of prevalence rates, but the majority land between like 40 to 70%. I've seen as low as 9 and as high as 86, but typically it's around that like 70% mark. So that's most of us. And so this fear, like I can't admit that I feel like a fraud because then I'm actually outing myself is sort of it's misleading, right? And if we talk about it, instead of people going, oh my gosh, you're such a fake and a fraud and imposter, they go, oh my gosh, me too. And then you don't feel so alone and it no longer feels, pathological. It's just normal.
So that brings me to the next question, or actually, I have one question before my question. So, is there like a definition of imposter syndrome?
Yeah. Yeah, it's essentially this feeling of like typically intellectual phoniness, but really it can show up in any context where you don't believe that you're as competent as other people believe you are, or, oh, sorry, um, that you are. like essentially you're lacking or inadequate in some way. You don't deserve to be where you are, even when there's objective evidence to the contrary. Like I said, no matter how many accolades you accrue, you can't outrun it. And what makes it imposter syndrome rather than just like an inner critic is the fear that at any moment it's going to be revealed, that everyone is going to find out you don't know what you're doing, you don't really belong there.
And then my next question is, and this is the question I've personally been looking forward to asking, why? What is it about the human mind, about human beings,
Yeah,
that this is happening and that is happening in so many people that we actually need a term for it? And
right.
we are not talking people with severe childhood trauma here. We are talking like N-
Almost everyone.
normal
Yeah,
people, almost everyone.
yeah.
What is it about the human mind that
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you my hypothesis. I mean, this is, I guess, an empirical question. We don't really know for sure. But one of my soapboxes I get up on, and if you look at the cover of my book, it's called Imposter No More, but the word syndrome is in there crossed out because this is not a syndrome. And when this phenomenon was first identified in the late 70s, it was called the imposter phenomenon. And at that time, it was doctors Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, two female psychologists. And at the time, they thought that this only affected high achieving women. And of course, we now know that's not true, but at that time, that's what was believed. And very quickly, something that was impacting high achieving women started to be called a syndrome, right? So there's like sexism kind of baked into this idea that it's imposter syndrome. That was never what it was meant to be called. The fact that it impacts the majority of us also means it's not a syndrome. What other disease or disorder or pathology exists in the world that is a disease, a disorder, or pathology that affects 70% of us? That's not a thing, right? And so to answer, like, why, where does this come from? Um, I think there's a couple things. Why do most of us experience this? Well, I think partly, and why I say it's not a syndrome, I think partly it's honestly evolution. So if you think about early humans, what, 100,000 years ago, early humans didn't have sharp claws, they didn't have fangs, they didn't run at high speeds, they had each other. And early humans who hunted and gathered and traveled together had a survival advantage. And if you got kicked out of your group, you would literally die. And so to constantly be checking your status, like engaging in that social comparison we all do now, especially with all the social media, to say, do I measure up? Do I add value? Are they going to find out that I don't really know what I'm doing or I'm not as good as them? Would ensure that you weren't going to get kicked out of your tribe. And so I think this is truly like baked into our DNA in much the same way like our fight flight response is baked into our DNA. And of course, we could argue that, in modern times, um, we don't need to be so hyper vigilant, except that we now have 8 decades of research that tell, like you could argue, well, we're not going to literally die if we get kicked out of our tribe anymore. But we actually will, because we have all of this research that shows when you look at literally every variable that predicts morbidity and mortality and physical and mental health and well-being, the number one most robust predictor is the presence of quality relationships in your life, right? And people who don't have relationships die earlier. So, really, not much has changed in 100,000 years with respect to that. So, doesn't it make sense that we would be worried about our peers discovering that we don't measure up and possibly rejecting us from whether it's our professional circles or our parent circles or our school or friend circles? So, again, like baked into the DNA. But not all of us have it, right? Everyone has a fight flight response. Not everyone endorses these thoughts and feelings. So, where is that difference? Where I think that difference lies is experiences of being othered or marginalized. So, a lot of studies look at, is there a difference between men and women? Lots of studies find it's more common in women, but some studies find it's the same. And even one study on a college campus found that it was more common in men. So, I think just this binary dichotomy split is not useful. I think what a more useful split would be is if you take people who have had an experience of being marginalized, versus those who haven't, that's where you'd see the difference. So if you're a person of color and you've been told you don't belong in white spaces, if you are in the LGBTQ community and you've been told you don't belong in cis straight white spaces, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you're going to question whether you belong in those spaces. And I tell this story in the book, but I told my dad, who's a cis straight white
Mm.
educated male, he's in all the privilege groups and really has never ever had an experience of being othered. I told him I was writing this book, and he said, "What the heck is imposter syndrome?" And I explained what it was, thinking once I described it, he'd go, "Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about." He just didn't know the name. And he was just utterly dumbfounded, like, could not relate to this one single bit. And I had similarly a male doctor, exact same conversation. And versus, my husband, who's a cis straight white male, but he was very small growing up. He was poor. He was bullied because he was like little and different. So even though he's a cis straight white male, he's had an experience of being othered. And so he too has had these kinds of feelings. So I think it's that, it's nature nurture kind of combination. But that's my hypothesis about where it comes from, but why it doesn't affect every single one of us.
Yeah, and perhaps also like there's like a functional perspective to it, like it serves a purpose, or served a purpose, just the same way as shame does, served a purpose when we were living, or when we were living in the tribe many,
Right.
many years ago. Yeah.
Exactly.
Do you find that does social media has any role to play in imposter syndrome, or in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like the things that we're already predisposed to when you're on social media, it's like it's on steroids. If humans are already naturally predisposed to engaging in social comparison, and then you're looking at all your friends announcing their vacations and their awards and all of their things, then you're that much more likely to feel less than. So
Yeah.
I don't think it's all of it, but I certainly think it can make it worse. And likewise, if more people come out and just say, "Hey, it's not a syndrome and it's normal and we all feel this way," it could potentially actually help in the opposite direction as well.
Yeah. And in your opinion, or in your experience, how do you think imposter syndrome shows up with psychologists or therapists?
Mm. Um, you know, I so I think it could show up in lots of different ways. I think one of the biggest ways it probably shows up is like, have you ever done that thing where you go to a training, CEs, workshops? Like, so for me, I have been to so many motivational interviewing trainings, I can't even count them anymore. And guess how much motivational interviewing I've done in the room with my clients? Like almost none. Because it's that, like, well, I wasn't trained to do this in graduate school. I never had supervision. So, like, I'm not an MI therapist. Like, who do I think I am? That voice that says, "Who do you think you are to do X?" Who do I think I am to try to do this MI thing when I haven't, like, I don't really know what I'm doing. So I think anytime someone is learning something new, but they're kind of on their own to do it, um, but it's like if you're doing something challenging that you care about doing well, especially if that thing is new, then you've got this kind of fertile ground for worrying that you don't really belong. But I think it can come out in lots of other places too. I have so many people in our field tell me they want to write a book, and so few who actually do, because their brain says, "You're not an author. You're not an expert. Who do you think you are? You can't do that." And my brain did the same thing, by the way, when I had the idea for the big book of ACT metaphors. But luckily, I had ACT and psychological flexibility, so I didn't listen to that to that thought and went ahead with it anyway. But that's a very specific area, but I think it can come out in any specific area. "Oh, I want to start a podcast." "Who do you think you are? You're not a podcaster. You're not expert. Who's going to want to talk to you? You're nobody." So it's like really anything you want to do that's sort of like out of the range of your comfort level can be a space where this would show up.
Yeah, I definitely recognize, because when I wrote my book, I definitely recognize like the whole, are you good enough to write a book? And now people are gonna read
Yeah.
your thoughts on ACT and how your take and everything. It's actually quite frightening, and you definitely notice that inner voice saying that,
I think anytime we do something creative, I feel like that is where it comes out maybe the most strongly. Again, empirical question, and I don't have research to back that, but in my own personal anecdotal experience, when you're creative, it's like putting yourself, like turning your skin inside out and putting yourself out into the world to be critiqued. I mean, there's like nothing more vulnerable, right? It's whether someone's writing or painting or singing or, podcasting, like doing anything that you have generated, that you have created, I think is just so incredibly vulnerable and can really be a space where this comes up.
yeah, and you definitely put yourself on the spot when you do something like this.
Yeah.
But also, what I experience when I train or when I supervise therapists, psychologists, especially kind of like inexperienced, many
Hmm.
of them actually at one point they usually ask me like, how do I kind of like embody the whole psychologist identity, or will I ever feel like a
Right.
therapist? And my answer is usually, well, I'll let you know when it happens.
Right.
And also, I think I'm wondering if we as psychologists could be more prone to it than other people because we actually kind of like have to help people
Right.
fix their lives, but we're also just human beings. I mean,
Yeah.
our kids will feel bad. We will get a divorce. We doubt ourselves. I mean, we all of that happens to us as well. And I was just wondering, like a therapist, that also makes us more prone to imposter syndrome because we
Yeah.
actually kind of
I,
like have to help our clients with it.
right. I think what you're speaking to is a situation where the stakes feel high. And so I think for anyone, certainly first responders of any kind, teachers, I mean, really, I think anytime you feel like, wow, whatever it is that I am doing in my career, if I don't do it well or right, that is going to be a disaster, right? Like if I like I have this person's life in my hands, I really need to know what the hell I'm doing. And if I don't feel like I know what I'm doing, that's pretty scary and pretty vulnerable. So, I think it has to do with stakes being high. I often say to people, and your listeners slash watchers can do this, is think about the last time you were laying awake at 2 o'clock in the morning and the wheels are spinning and you're worrying, right? Think about what it is that you were worrying about. And it probably isn't that Game of Thrones isn't coming back for another season, even if it was your favorite show of all time, right? We worry about relationships and health and being competent in our jobs and the state of the world. We worry about the things we care about. And therapists care about helping people and doing a good job. So, of course, we worry about doing it well. Now, is that a problem that needs to be fixed? No. You know what's a problem that needs to be fixed? Therapists who don't worry about doing a good job, right? Especially new therapists. Overconfidence is far more problematic than, questioning your legitimacy or competency or that kind of thing.
So that actually like imposter syndrome is actually it can be kind of helpful or healthy to doubt yourself once in a while.
I think it can. I think the line is in the doing. So if you're doubting and that is leading you to like really make sure that you're paying attention and you're reading and you're learning, studying, going to the classes, the trainings, whatever it is, and that is making you better. And you're getting in there and doing the job because so much of the learning is in the doing, then you're like in the sweet spot. But if your imposter syndrome is saying you cannot get into the arena and do the job until you are knowledgeable enough, ready, confident, skilled, expert, then you're never gonna do it. And I think that's where people get stuck. And I think the other way it can look helpful but is problematic. So when we avoid challenge because of these thoughts and feelings, then the cost is missed opportunities, which is what we were just talking about. But I think the other thing people do, and I think most therapists can really relate to this, and this is true of me too. It's not just underdoing and avoiding, it's overdoing, overachieving. If I just get one more degree, one more award, one more, right? And you're on this like, is it bad to achieve? Well, no, but it is if you're just on this hamster wheel of trying to outrun it and not being thoughtful and values oriented about the work you're doing. And the cost of that is burnout. So, I think the key is it's psychological flexibility, right? It's like recognizing that these thoughts and feelings are present and then consciously choosing how you want to show up in your career based on those values, not being driven by the imposter related thoughts and feelings in either direction, in the underdoing or the overdoing direction.
Yeah, I definitely remember when I was an inexperienced psychologist, and when I had clients coming in, I was just so over prepared for my sessions. I mean, literally down to the minute.
Yeah.
Sometimes, what would we be doing? And you actually lost. I mean, you kind of like lost something very important. You kind of like lost the presence, but also you kind of like
Yeah.
lost the client because
Yeah.
it became more about you hiding
Hmm.
and not hiding your imposter syndrome. But actually now, in my experience, I find sometimes being more open, not always having the answers, can actually be very helpful when you're sitting having clients in, like not being that super all-knowing expert in everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So for those watching, listening, that might be struggling with this, what advice would you give them? Any exercises, anything that you would like to tell them besides reading your book,
Yeah.
of course?
Well, of course, read the book. But no, I love to tell this story about I was asked to give a talk to adolescents, high school, a lot of high school kids. It was at Gillette Stadium, which is where the Patriots play here in New England. And in the luxury boxes, it was like this amazing conference. And so I was asked to come give a talk, and they said, what we want is for you to give these kids something actionable that they can do when the conference is over that will improve their mental health and reduce their vulnerability to suicide. And you have 25 minutes. And I was like, oh, okay, let me get right on that. Like, normally it's taking me 6 months of meeting with someone for 50 minutes once a week to do that, right? But right in the next moment, after I sort of like initially panicked, I thought, oh no, I have exactly the thing that I'm going to do. And I think if we could teach every human on this planet truly one thing that would massively change their lives, it would be learn to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because if you think about how many choices you make based on not wanting to feel a certain way, you see how pervasive it is in your life. And if that was no longer in the driver's seat, think about the way your relationships would change, the opportunities that you would take on, the challenges you would take on, like it would change everything. And it's not that hard to do. Is it hard to go like give a talk in front of 1,000 people if you're anxious about public speaking? Yes, of course it's hard. But you can practice getting comfortable being uncomfortable in thousands of different ways every single day. And the more you do that, the better equipped you are to then do the hard things. So, for example, I don't have my wallet up here in my office right now, but if I did, I would show this to you. If I have cash, I like the cash to be in denominational order, all facing the same way. You will never find my cash that way. It will be folded and out of order and shoved in my wallet, and I hate it. But when the cashier gives it to me, I look at it and I want to switch it and it's uncomfortable and I stuff it in and I walk away. And that's just one tiny little thing that I do every single day. I've been practicing this stuff for almost 25 years at this point. And still today, this is something I am actively doing. So like we can do a really quick practice with people who are watching or listening right now. So just if you fold your hands, like kind of prayer hands, the way that feels comfortable, and just notice how it feels. And now switch it so it's like one finger off. Okay, so now it's like this funny feeling way, and notice how it feels. And especially notice the urge to switch back or let go, because that's what we respond to, right? Is like, oh, I just got to get escape from this. And can you just sit and notice and allow and stay? And then I give people like a mantra. It's like a 5-part mantra that you can repeat after me. So it's this is uncomfortable. You want to do it?
This is uncomfortable,
But it's just a feeling.
but it's just a feeling.
It's not dangerous.
It's not dangerous.
It's temporary,
It's temporary,
and I can handle it.
and I can handle it.
And so that's not about talking yourself out of it. It's about changing your relationship to discomfort. Because what are the normal messages people tell themselves about discomfort? It's bad, it's dangerous, I can't handle it, I must escape it, I must fix it, I must change it. When in reality, it's just a feeling. And, I always make sure to tell clients when I say just a feeling, I don't mean for that to be invalidating. It is incredibly painful to, have a panic attack or like have to endure some of these very challenging feelings. And at the end of the day, it truly just is a feeling. And you are a lot stronger, a lot less fragile than your brain is trying to tell you you are. And you can do feelings. And sometimes I like to give examples of like, if somebody runs marathons, I'll be like, is running a marathon comfortable? No. Well, then we know you can do uncomfortable. So that's great news because if you can run a marathon, then you can do this. We just need to teach you how. And like I said, there's thousands of ways that you can do this. And then it can be fun and creative to come up with some of those. And you can, make them more and more challenging as you go.
And how do you think that ACT can be helpful working with imposter syndrome, both with clients, but also for the psychologist watching this?
Yeah. Well, it's all about cultivating psychological flexibility. So, can I be aware of the feeling of anxiety and self doubt, the thoughts that are saying, who do you think you are? You're not a real writer, therapist, whatever. Can I notice those? Can I open and detach from those and then choose to show up in the arena based on my values? Which means if I'm doing something challenging that I care about doing well, I'm going to have some psychological pain, right? And it's not about waiting or trying to make it go away. It's about being willing to do it in the presence of that discomfort. But if you practice getting comfortable being uncomfortable, that doesn't become such a hard thing.
Yeah, so it's not about making the feelings go away and not about making feel confident or feel comfortable doing therapy,
Right.
about being able to embrace it, but perhaps also like it can be a gentle reminder that you actually care about this client, you care about this person.
Exactly. Exactly. And I
And
talk in the book about, I call it the gap trap, which is where we get trapped in stagnation due to a perceived gap in knowledge, skill, expertise, confidence. And we think we have to fill the gap before we move forward, which of course is a trap. And I have a metaphor that I love. I shared this in a workshop once and a therapist got upset because it was a similar visual image to something Russ Harris does, but it was like the opposite of what Russ Harris does. So now I feel like I have to like put out a trigger warning or something when I explain this if there are therapists listening. But I call this metaphor the lighthouse. But if you imagine that you're a ship and you are journeying on the sea, and maybe you have a destination, or maybe you're just on an adventure, and all of a sudden a very, very thick fog rolls in. And that fog, of course, is your thoughts and your feelings. And it's so thick you can't see in front of your face. And so you think, gosh, this is treacherous and dangerous. My only option is to drop anchor and wait it out and wait for the fog to clear. But what if the fog never clears? Like mine hasn't, has yours?
no,
Right? The fog is always there. And so as long as you've got your anchor down, you're no longer moving forward. But there is a way that you can journey forward even when that fog is thick. And that's the lighthouse. And the lighthouse, that beacon, is your values. And so you can follow those values even when the thoughts and feelings are, really thick and saying, who do you think you are? You can't, you can't.
yeah, and perhaps even though there's not a lighthouse, I mean, a ship can always use a compass and still find a way through the
There
fog.
you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was it a client? I can't remember who it was. Oh, I hate when I can't give credit to the right person. But I heard someone say, even if you don't have a map, you always have a compass. And I loved that, right? Even if you don't know the exact distance and the turn by turn, as long as you have a direction, you're good to go. Isn't
Yeah.
that nice?
It's very nice. That's why
Yeah.
I actually have a compass tattooed on my arm. So
Oh, I love that.
yeah, yeah. So I always know where my directions are.
That's
And
cool.
I remember, I don't know who told me this. Once again, I just like you, I don't mind. I hate it when I can't give credit to the right people. But I once therapist once told me like the difference between like an expert and a beginner is that they don't always know what to do, but the expert is more comfortable in being uncomfortable,
Mm,
and the expert
mm-hmm.
is more comfortable not knowing,
Not
where
knowing.
the beginner
Yeah.
perhaps will try to hide
Yeah.
that they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah. And Jill, we could continue talking about this for hours, or at least I could continue asking questions about
Me
this
too.
for hours. But I also want to just have a few minutes where we get a chance to talk about, like, perhaps just get our viewers to connect with you or learn a bit more about you at a personal level. And these are some of the questions that I'd like to ask people every time.
Sure.
So the first question would be like, what is one of the biggest obstacles that you had to overcome as a therapist? The example that I usually give is like when I was starting doing ACT, I only focused on the exercises, the metaphors, all of that, and I forgot
Yeah.
something really important. I forgot relationship with the client. So I
Yeah.
kind of like had to overcome that obstacle and relearn that skill, or kind of like learn that skill, which was the foundation for my book, The Therapeutic Relationship in ACT.
Mm-hmm.
So, what would you say is some of the biggest obstacles that you had to overcome or learn as an inexperienced therapist?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love that your experience of pain and difficulty led you to doing this amazing, having this amazing contribution, that it
Oh,
directly led to this specific book. That's so cool. And
thank
I
you.
think that that does happen a lot. And I will confess, the what you said was your obstacle of like over relying on the metaphors and exercises. Do you know my inner critic sometimes says you never should have written the big book of act metaphors because now you're part of the problem. Like now you've got all these act therapists that are like, all I have to do is open this book and do these metaphors and exercises. So another example where that damn voice just never stops, right? It doesn't go, hey, I wrote this book that like loads of act therapists use and love. It's like, no, you messed up. You know, you've created an issue now in the ACT community. Um, I think for me, it might be what I already confessed is I tend to stay like now I love ACT and I believe in it so wholeheartedly and I live it in my own life. And so of course it's truly what I want to be doing in session, but I think I may stay a little um, too loyal to the model because I do have some fear. I gave you that example of motivational interviewing where, like, I don't even know how much time and money I have spent on learning this. And it's still something that I tend to shy away from. I started to learn a little bit about ICBT, like the new treatment for OCD, and was like, yeah, no, I don't want to do that. And I admit that. I mean, that still shows up for me. And I think the way I rationalize it is like, well, I don't really need it because I have these other tools that are so great and so effective that, I'll just do that. But what about the client who's ambivalent and so they're not really engaging in ACT and maybe could use some of that motivation, or maybe the ERP isn't working the way it normally does because it's not 100% effective for 100% of the people 100% of the time. So, and I think that that's inhibited my growth as a therapist a little bit.
Over relying on the model. That's actually a very interesting perspective.
Yeah.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what advice would that be?
Oh, do it scared. I mean, I feel like that's like the crux of, I do a lot of public speaking or podcast interviews and I tell my clients, so I can't remember if I said this already, but I run an anxiety clinic. Um, and, so clients are coming to me because they want to feel less anxious. And I almost always confess to them that I've been living the same, employing the same tools I'm teaching them. And I've been doing so for over 20 years. And I'm more anxious than I've ever been. And you should see their faces. They're like, what? You know,
That's not
and
what they
you're going to
expected
help
to
me be
hear.
less anxious? What?
That's definitely not what they expected to hear.
It's not what they want to hear. And I say, but it's anxiety I choose because before I learned to cultivate psychological flexibility, I would hide and stay in my comfort zone and only do what was safe. And so, yeah, I was less anxious, but my life was so small. And now, I write books and I speak on stages and do TED Talks and have a big podcast, like things I never would have done if it weren't for learning psychological flexibility. And those things make me anxious because they're challenging and I care about doing them well. But what I also get is a sense of vitality and purpose and meaning and all that other good stuff too. So I think, what I would tell my, like, I just wish I learned that even sooner, right? If it was my younger self, and what I try to impart on my own children is that not waiting until you feel expert and confident, but like just being willing to do the things that matter to you in the presence of some of that difficult emotion and thought.
Yeah, go through the fog. Don't wait for it to pass.
Exactly.
That's a good advice. And if you could give
Yeah.
one advice to the viewers, perhaps the more inexperienced therapists listening in, watching this, what would your advice be to them?
It would be exactly the same. Do it scared. And like to really practice with the getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And you can do it with like any of your senses. I have right in my desk drawer here, I have Bean Boozled jelly beans that I make my clients eat with me. And you spin the spinner and it says to eat the pink one, and it might be a strawberry banana smoothie flavor, or it might be vomit. And it's like such a brilliant way. Yeah. They're
You
like
have
Harry
you have
Potter.
that you have that in the US? It sounds like
Literally.
something out of Harry Potter.
See, look, I have them right here. Bean Boozled. And it's awful. They're absolutely terrible. But it's such a great willingness practice because there's anticipation and dread and curiosity, and then either relief or disgust. And at the end of the day, it's just a jelly bean,
And the feeling
right?
will pass.
And the feeling will pass and you can handle it and it's not dangerous. So I think the more people are willing to make that a part, like take a shower that's just a little too hot or a little too cold, like you can literally put this into your life throughout the day, every single day. And then it will get a lot easier to get into that therapy room and do the work, even when you feel uncertain.
Well, Jill, that is fantastic advice. And thank you so much for wanting to be on my little YouTube series here. I
My
will link to
pleasure.
your website, where people can read more about you, upcoming trainings, events that you have, read more about your books.
Yeah, it's all
And
just at jillstoddard.com. And I do have some evergreen CE courses specifically for ACT therapists or for therapists, but I think they're all ACT. Some are just ACT in general, and some are ACT specifically for imposter syndrome.
oh, perfect. So
Yeah,
I'll link to all of that. And thank you so much and for showing me the little exercise I'm going to do tomorrow with some of my anxious clients.
love
So
it.
we're going to have a
Good. Let me know how it goes.
Jill, thank you so much and
Thank
have
you,
a great
Morgan.
day.
You too.
Bye.